Hello and welcome to Design Boss Dialogue, the podcast where bold and ambitious women in interior design come for real conversations to transform and take their businesses to new heights. I am your host, Lisa Marie Elkhadraoui, interior designer and business mentor, here to share my experiences and insights into running an interior design business, as well as empowering you to build the confident, profitable design business you've been dreaming of and truly deserve. In this space, we blend creativity with strategy to help you craft your success and thrive in the world of design. Every episode is packed with unfiltered, no BS conversations, daily inspiration, and actionable business tips to turn your passion into a thriving, cash-rich business. Together, we're redefining what it means to succeed in the interior design industry, one intentional, game-changing decision at a time. So get ready to step up, elevate, and create the design empire you've always envisioned. Welcome back. We are opening day 4. It's the 4th of December, and today joining me is Sarah Burghard, who is an interior and textile designer with over a decade's worth of experience creating story-led interiors for hospitality brands before launching her latest venture, Signature Styling, a bespoke textile and soft furnishing service for interior designers. Now, Sarah is based between the UK and Indonesia and combines her 7th generation textile heritage with modern digital printing and small run production to help designers create custom fabrics that perfectly express their clients individually. Her mission is to make bespoke textiles easy, inspiring, and accessible so every designer can deliver truly distinctive interiors with a wow factor. And today we're going to be talking about not only the power of reframing your thoughts in the industry, but also how accessible it is nowadays to have your own bespoke fabric printed to make a unique impact into your clients' projects and their homes. Sarah, welcome to the Christmas Advent Calendar podcast. It's lovely to have you on.
Thank you. It's fantastic to be here.
So you're obviously not in the UK because it looks quite nice and tropical behind you.
Yes, I know. I haven't got a Christmas tree, so I'm enjoying looking at yours. I, however, have some tropical plantation because I'm in Lombok, which is in Indonesia, the little sister to Bali.
Oh, and you've got a tropical palm tree, not a Christmas tree, a palm tree, which is lovely. Yeah. So tell me your journey. How long have you been based out in Lombok?
Just over a year. And I suppose, in short, I'm 8,000 miles from the UK. And I came here 2 years ago because my mother passed away, which was expected. And it was a kind of marking of time and a new chapter. I needed some R&R, wanted to take my eyes and mind off the business. So I came to Indonesia because I had previously lived here about 20 years ago. Hadn't been back for a very long time. And I thought I need somewhere to go and nourish my soul, my body, get some sunshine. And I came to Lombok because it's a very quiet little island. And I just fell in love with how it made me feel here, really. So my very sensible plan was to ease myself gradually into sort of semi-retirement over the next 10 years and spend a month or two in Lombok, just every year. And then I came back to sort of scout it out a bit more. And then I thought, why am I waiting? And I got my return flight within 3 weeks of getting back to the UK. I just thought, I'm going to do it. I'm going to live it and see what happens rather than planning and sort of making it something for the future. I think at this stage in my life, I'm all about doing things now rather than waiting. And it's absolutely fabulous. So over a year now I've been here. It was an experiment. I thought I might stay a season, might stay a couple of months. And at the moment, I'm not planning to come home other than to visit for important occasions. But yeah, I'm setting up my business here. So it's an exciting journey on so many different levels.
I love that. And with your business, you have got a very exciting business. You have such an amazing, flourished portfolio of what you have achieved in your lifetime. But talk to us about what you're doing in Lombok and what you've set up.
So one of the real draws of Indonesia is its textile heritage, because at heart, I'm a textiles girl. I retrained after children in my 40s at Central St Martin's in textile design. Previously, I was an actress, so I've always been in the creative arts, always been a kind of an independent spirit, and always been freelance. But I went back to art school and just fell in love with textiles and the whole medium on many, many different levels. So I've taken that world, and it's sort of through interior design that I've come through a process where I can create bespoke fabrics for not only my own clients, but also for other interior designers and their clients.
Oh, I love that. And there must be so many beautiful factories and just different variations of fabrics and Aladdin's caves with things out there that you can get your hands on that we might not necessarily have here in the UK.
That's right. It is much more accessible. I mean, craft here is huge. I'm also more sort of developing the digital print side of things, but you know, traditional elements such as batik and weaving are all elements I want to sort of explore as a base for the craft. And then I kind of turn that into the modern 21st century digital printing element. So it's a process that's very, very, very flexible. And the creativity comes between myself and whoever I'm designing with or for. So it's a collaborative process that we create something that you can't buy off the shelf, which I think is really exciting.
I love that. Because it's so, nowadays, you can go and just get fabric off the shelf. But if you want something that's uniquely yours, I think there has been such a blockage around the mind with designers that, oh gosh, actually, that's untouchable. I don't think we can get that. And that's obviously what we're here to talk about today, is the reframing of those thoughts with how accessible bespoke fabrics are. So just talk me through that a little bit, just so we can understand with the listeners.
Yeah, so I think in terms of, you know, changing one's thoughts and thinking, I mean, I think I'm a true testament to that, because at the end of the day, I came home to the UK and I was like, gosh, it would be wonderful I could live in Indonesia and it would be amazing if I could spend some time there. And then I just thought, well, hang on a minute, why am I thinking it like that? Why don't I reframe this into, how can I do this? When's it going to happen? Let's make it occur. And so it's the same with my printing business. It's about textiles for designers, because ultimately you might think to yourself as a designer, oh, it'd be great if I could find something like this. And you go out and you look for it and you're all excited. And we know that there are so many wonderful textiles on the market. But at the end of the day, it's really quite a big deal to find the exact right thing. If it's for a special heirloom for a client or something you want upholstered, I think it's also sometimes in your mind's eye, you have something and you just can't quite find it. And I'm reframing that for you, going, yeah, you can have absolutely anything you want. We can create it to your specific vision, your creativity, and then I will facilitate your thinking, your ideas, and also push you maybe a little bit further as a designer, which I think is the collaborative part that I enjoy immensely.
And you've got a really wonderful service called Signature Styling. And how can designers that are listening to this kind of tap in and access something like that?
Well, you can find me. That's easy to do through the podcast. Yeah. And in effect, I'm a chatty person. I mean, my world is all about the people. That's why I've sort of transferred what I do. I've been an interior designer for 10 years and I've always created fabrics for my clients, and it's been my USP. And now I'm sharing that USP with my peer group, because actually I love working with interior designers. So I'm very interested in anybody who just wants to have a chat. That's, I think, what I'm saying. Because actually, once you have a conversation, you know if there's a good fit about the creative process. And if someone comes to me with a, well, I'm doing this and I'm just wondering if we could go, okay, have you thought about this? And what about that? And why wouldn't we think about maybe introducing this into it? Because that could be really personal for your client. And I might ask questions about your suggestions or your thoughts that you hadn't thought of. And through that collaborative process, that brainstorming, that creative kind of melting pot, I think something much more exciting comes out, because you've got a greater sense of looking at it from a different perspective. So, yeah, my sort of main thing with designs is let's just have a chat. Let's just see if what I do and what you want to do connect. And if it does, we'll take it from there.
I love that. And I think it's so important. Business can be so much fun. It doesn't need to be rigid, and it always starts with really lovely conversations. And then from there, you find that lovely collaborative approach with one another. And you have such a rich contact pool, not only in Indonesia, but also in the UK, that you have access to many different ways. Because let's just tap into your family background. So textiles are in the blood, aren't they?
They are. So it's kind of a bit of a running joke in my family that I went back to art school as a mature student, and after a foundation in art and design, I went back to the local college, and I discovered that textiles was really what I was leaning into and I really enjoyed. And then I applied to Central St Martin's and got onto a degree for textile design. And then literally in the middle of the night, one night, I woke up and went, my God, we've got a textile factory in our family, which is such a privileged, silly sounding thing to say. But the truth is my mother and her brother came from a textiles heritage. But as the lineage goes, the brother, i.e. my uncle, received the factory on the death of his parents, not my mother, because she's a woman. So at that stage in life, women didn't receive it. So in a strange way, our two families don't really interconnect about business and about textiles. I'd never been to the factory. I didn't really know anything about the factory. I didn't really know anything about my heritage. And on doing my studies and realizing that there was this yearning to do textiles, it just clicked. And I was like, that's really fascinating. So, of course, I picked up the phone the next day to my cousin, who is my age, and I said, Charlie, you know you run the factory that's been in the family for years. I want to come and visit and find out. So the long and the short of it is I'm very proud to say that my generational history goes back 7 generations, and it was founded by my great somebody called William Ball in 1832. And the textile factory is still very much in business in Nottingham. And what's interesting for me is that their textiles have gone through many different configurations over the generations. And now they are really at the forefront of technical textiles, which a lot of people don't know much about. But, you know, we're not talking interiors and colours here. We're talking, if you go on an aeroplane, what is the sealant fabric that stops the door from falling out because of the pressure? What is the fabric which goes onto an NHS operating table to ensure that the weight of the human on it is spread? You know, there's bomb-proof disposable fabrics for army people. You know, there's all sorts of technical textiles, and that's the area that they've gone into over many years. Fire retardant fabrics, all sorts of things like that. So it's a fascinating world to have come from, and I think I feel that there's a little part of me that wants to keep the family sort of heritage going in my own way. It's a much different way of creating fabrics that tell a story, because I think that's really, really special and what I can offer to the future of fabrics.
I think that's so lovely, because interiors are naturally storytelling anyway. And when you work with so many wonderful clients, you know, you're telling stories about them. You're bringing like their personality and their character into projects. It's not about you. You're receiving the brief. And if you can implement a fabric, a unique fabric that can tell a story, or it has an essence of personality or character to your client, into their project and into their home, that makes the whole scheme just really, really special, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I sum it often in terms of it being an emotional connection. And of course, we all know if you're doing a good design brief with a lovely client, you have an emotional connection between yourselves because you're working collaboratively on some levels. And everybody wants there to be an emotional connection. You know, it's the cliche of the big reveal when somebody just cries because they love how it looks. I mean, that is part of what we love doing, is giving people a response that is quite overwhelming. However, I think once that initial sort of surprise and delight has settled down, then of course people are living with their scheme and really enjoying it. But if amongst that scheme you've got something which touches them on a personal and emotional level, whether it's maybe something they've got from an heirloom from a family member or someone who's passed away, you know, and I don't mean something that directly looks like them or anything, but something they've been given, like a letter or some handwriting, or whether there's something in the family history, or whether it's the architecture of the area or the location, location. There's a million ways that we can create something. But ultimately, that is then speaking and being specific to that individual rather than something that you can go and buy off the shelf or that somebody else down the road might have. These, you can't get them anywhere else. They're designed specifically for the client. And I think that elevates their sense of just quite how clever their designer is, really, to bring in something special. This isn't about me. I'm behind the scenes. I'm a supplier in this. I'm always happy to do conversations with clients if someone wants me to. But fundamentally, this is helping designers bring something out of their armory, out of their special toolbox, something that's the real ta-da that ultimately clients want from a designer, because otherwise they would be doing it themselves. They want something special, something unique, and something that perhaps the other designers don't have. And that's what I sort of offer to you, really, as a way of standing out and delivering something on an emotional level that's a lot deeper for your clients, which I think is a wonderful feeling for everybody involved.
It really is. And I think it brings it all together, from that story, the connection, the project, like the end result. It's just absolutely beautiful. I love it. So going back to reframing your thoughts around this, how strong does that golden thread running through your narrative, and how long have you kind of had that I need to just reframe my thoughts with regards to, you know, you, personal, business, life, fabrics, whatnot?
I think it's something that I've developed over time, and I'm probably only cognitively acknowledged that I'm able to do and learnt to do over the last 10 years, I think. I'm of an age where I've been through quite a few decades now. I've been through a divorce. I've lost people in my life. I've had various changes of career. As I mentioned, I was an actress. I've been to art school. I've done all sorts of things. And, you know, within that, naturally, there are some bleak times that come and some difficult periods. But I always just feel there's a resilience that I'm really grateful for in my mind. And I think the resilience comes from being able to reframe. And of course, one needs to sit with emotion if it's a very tender time, and it's not about negating the realities of how one is feeling. But I think if you can see your circumstances as a point in a process rather than a landing and a kind of final destination, then that really helps me see beyond where I am. And I think reframing is an interesting point. I had a project when I was a lot younger, and I had a little one who was sort of 4 or 5, and I had a flat in London. And this wasn't an emotional reframing, but it was definitely a spatial reframing, which I think interior designers, of course, do all the time. We change the interior for somebody, and it can completely change the focus. And I had a flat in London, and it looked out, and it was on the 7th story of a very tall block right in the middle of central London, just by the hospital there, Great Ormond Street Hospital, yes. Anyway, I looked out of my window, and there was another block exactly the same opposite. And I remember thinking, I you know, if we could just shift that building like 20 foot, I'd have a much better view. Now, there's no way you can shift a building. But what I did with my kind of design eye was I took out a wall in the flat, and it meant that you could walk into the room from a completely different angle. Thereby, the building shifted kind of from one half of the window to the other half of the window. So it was a reframe of a physical building. And that was purely done by mental gymnastics. How can this happen? And so whilst that was a sort of, that's a metaphor for what I do mentally, which is I'll look at something and I'll think, this is how it appears to me at the moment. And this is true. This is what it is. But how can I look at it from a different perspective and create a different reality from this thinking? And it's slightly hard to explain, because every time one does it, it's for a different circumstance. And it's not something I've read about or something that I've developed through, you know, learning. It's through life experience and through my own mental survival mechanisms, optimism. There's all sorts of reasons or words that I could use. But I'm just a big believer that if you view something differently, you can really change your relationship with your circumstances and your aspirations, actually.
I think that is so powerful, and it's almost like you've explained a superpower, because a lot of designers have where they're able to go into spaces and it might be complete concrete walls and there's nothing in the rooms or the space. It's completely concrete. And they can see the finished article and they can actually build the roadmap to go back, which is something I do with all of my clients after being in it for 15 years. It's a muscle that you exercise. But being able to reframe and say, okay, well, this is it like this, but actually let's change the perspective, let's reframe, let's see how we can come at this from a different angle to create a different viewpoint or experience is just absolutely phenomenal. I love that. I really love that. And I think it's the power of reframing then across the board, because you can reframe like that in interior design, but then you can also reframe your mindset to say, well, actually, how can we have an even a better positive experience through this? What narrative are we telling ourselves?
And I think that to give a slightly more gritty example of how it's worked for me, a slightly less sort of, I'm living in a tropical paradise and my family's got a textile factory and, life is just wonderful if you just think about things differently, which quite frankly, I would find a little bit nauseating if I was listening to someone else saying that. So let me just put some reality about my life into this as well.
A dose of reality into the situation.
The truth is that I also reframed when post-divorce, I was not in a great place and my business had stopped due to the pandemic. And, I was really, really pushed to get an income coming through the door and I needed to get a job. And at sort of late 40s, I was sadly unemployable because any sort of little job I would go in for, like working in a bar, something like that, or a restaurant or a cafe. And they go, well, why do you want to work here? And I'd like, well, because I need some money. And they're like, but as soon as you get a decent job, you'll disappear. So they weren't interested. And then obviously my age was a factor because at the end of the day, at my age, I'm not necessarily the youngest spring chicken that's available for that sort of work. And then I would go for more senior jobs, which were much more appropriate to my level and my experience. And they would look at my CV and go, well, you've been all over the shop. You've been an actress, you've been this, fascinating, really interesting. But have you actually ever worked for anybody? And the truth was that I hadn't really. So on many levels, I was unemployable. And I ended up getting a job with a Motability scooter company in Bristol. And it was, I would say, a very strong dose of humility. It was a 9 to 5, and the person who was my manager wore very pointy shoes and thought he was top dog, and he was about 30. And I had to toe the line, and it was very, very, very difficult to be in a position where ultimately I was told what to do, what to say. It was a sales job. And the saving grace was that people I was speaking with were lovely, lovely older people. And I had a fantastic amount of conversations with them. I was their top seller because I actually really loved the people I was working with. But the company culture that I was working within was awful. It was horrendous. And I would go in there every day feeling like my life had just collapsed. I used to be in the West End as an actress. What was I doing in a store on the phone, having to make 150 phone calls a day to sell something? Anyway, what I did, obviously there was shame, there was guilt about my business failing. And I reframed it like this, Lisa. This was how I managed to cope with it, was I said, okay, I haven't finished my business. It's on pause because at the moment the clients aren't coming through the door. So I'm doing a business savvy pivot, which is to make sure that money comes in through the door. And what I will do is I will take this as a learning experience, which I'm being paid for. I'm being paid incredibly badly. I was on minimum wage and the bonus system was corrupt. So the more you made, the less you received. It was demoralizing. That's the point. Yeah. And I thought, I'm not going to sit with the sense of failure. I'm just not. So I thought, my business is on hold. It's slightly grandiose, but it's the only way I could get through it, was I'm taking a working sabbatical to work within a company to learn about sales and to also learn about how I want to run my company. Because every time I see something I don't like here, that's a lesson for me to know how I want to go forward when I'm more capable of running my business again. And that changed my entire feeling about going in every day. They didn't know. I sort of had it like my undercover version. Yeah. Nobody knew. It was all in my head. But suddenly I had a completely different mission. I was like, I'm here to gain knowledge, to gain experience, to understand what I love in a business and what I hate in a working day. And that got me through, and that gave me an income that gave me a mortgage, that meant I could buy a flat, that meant I could move on, meant that I could start my business again. And the whole thing, came to a much more sort of happier place. But that was some serious reframing for survival, mental health survival, rather than fanciful sort of versions of it. And I think that when you're at your lowest points and when things are really hard, that's when that skill is much more essential, really, and much more poignant.
And when I'm listening to you talking about that, being in a job that, you've paused one area and you're reframing the way you look at where you are, what you're doing, what you're taking on. This is actually a really lovely message for all of those listeners out there that might be in corporate, that want to kick off their interior design business, that might be in, a part-time job that just wants to, really get their business up and running off the ground. And you might be going in going, oh, I've got to do this just because of that. But let's just stop and pause and reflect, and let's reframe that and look at Sarah's story and say, actually, let's take all the learnings from what you're doing and where you are, and make sure that, you're taking all the lessons, and when you implement them into your own business, you're taking everything what you love. But also, whilst you are in these positions, and this is what I say to people day in, day out that are in corporate or part-time work or full-time work that, want to start their own businesses, you're learning on someone else's watch. So actually, if you're being paid to do that job and you can facilitate your side hustle to kind of get it up and running, you're being paid to do that, which is an actual privilege in its own right sometimes. So it's amazing that you touched upon that. And thank you so much for sharing that, because I think that will bring so much inspiration to people listening to say, I can get through this. I might just need to reframe how I'm talking to myself on a daily basis with it.
I agree. And I think it's part of the learned experience that those of us that have been doing this longer want to share. It's the reality of it. And we all know it's a cliche, but social media only shows the bits that we choose to show. And that's why a podcast like this is so valuable, because we can speak openly and in a safe space where those that are listening will understand the full context, not just the snapshot. And at the end of the day, I don't mind what type of business you run. If you run your own business, it is a complicated, very demanding process that you learn every day, every minute of every day. I don't think anybody that runs their own business feels they've achieved what they want to achieve. There's always something else to learn. And it always takes twice as long as you expect. I'm plus 10 years in, and, I'm almost starting again with my textiles, because I want to do something and shape it in that way. And it never stays still. And I think it's useful for those that are listening, and I always find it useful when I'm listening to others, to hear the less glamorous part, the struggles.
Absolutely.
I find it very sort of annoying when you listen to a podcast and someone says, yes, so I left college and then I started working overseas, and you're like, well, how? How on earth did you do that bit? How did you leap?
Where's the middle bit?
Where's the middle bit? And of course we don't need to hear the whole story, but I do think it's good to keep it real sometimes.
Absolutely. And I remember if I go back many, many moons ago, I was working in the head office of Karen Millen. I didn't particularly enjoy it. The fashion industry, is incredibly difficult. And I come from a fashion background. And I'd started my first business, which was home accessories, and had a lovely little online platform selling British designers, all handmade. And I remember going into Karen Millen and thinking I'm going to use my hours in my lunch break, and when I get home I'm going to do everything I can so that I can kind of get up to the wage of one so it tips over the other, so I can then finally leave that. And I remember the day when it finally happened. It was, a year or so later, and I had my resignation letter in my hand to go into the boardroom to give it. And I was so excited for that day, so excited to hand it in. But it was a journey to get there, a real journey. And the mindset work that I had to do to support myself in reframing why I was there and what I was doing kind of took a lot. But yeah. So Sarah, before we part ways and the podcast comes to an end, what would the last final tip or piece of value you would like to give our lovely listeners heading into 2026, a new year?
I think it's go further than you think you can in your design. And I think that many designers believe that if you're going to be using bespoke, its pricing is beyond your reach for the average client. And I think it's worth understanding that that's just not the case now, and that you can push things further than you expect. Come out of your comfort zone, come and work, have a chat with me, and basically see where we can push your interiors to a level where you're supplying something for your customers that you wouldn't have imagined. After hearing this conversation, it becomes a reality. Reframe how you view fabrics. Reframe them as something that can serve you. You can have fabrics to create what you want. You don't have to choose anymore. You can get exactly what's in your mind's eye. And that's a special, fantastic opportunity. And if you choose to take it, it will pay back. But if you choose not to, then, you're missing something that so many other people are finding is a real string to their bow. And it's just exciting. And I think that 2026, we need to go into it feeling excited about what we're going to create as designers.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And for all of you that want to dive into Sarah's world, all of her details on how you can find Sarah, her website, so you can go check out all of her lovely services, as well as her Instagram, please go give her a follow, send her a DM and say hi. And all those details are going to be in the show notes. So head to the show notes now. Sarah, thank you once again for coming on. It's been so lovely to have you.
It's been brilliant to see your Christmas tree. And I really, really enjoy that. And it's just been lovely to chat. So thank you so much, Lisa.
You're more than welcome. Thank you. Take care. And I will be back tomorrow for another inspirational packed podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Design Boss Dialogue. If you love what you heard, then please share the podcast with your friends and any women that could do with a dose of empowerment just from me. I would love to hear your thoughts around today's podcast with your key takeaways and wins, because your feedback means everything to me. Also, don't forget to leave a review as well as hit that follow button so you never miss out on any inspiring conversations with me or any other trailblazing women I have on. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes, and remember, unleashing your inner design power and unlocking your true potential is only a click away. See you next time.